Thank you. Thank you, everybody. How are you feeling today? So far, so good? All right. Now, you might be wondering why I'm up here this morning, right? There's no classes. There's no teaching involved, all right? But what makes up teaching? What makes teaching so interesting? That's what we are going to be talking about. So, ladies and gentlemen, my topic for today is about the ideal teacher that we are all expecting. All right? Now, when we talk about the teacher that we expect, the teacher that we would want to be, how a teacher should be, or how a teacher could be an inspiration to many. Now, let me be honest to you. Teaching was not the field that I chose at first. All right? I was just like any other students. I was very much into this bandwagon of becoming any of these three. It's the lawyer, the engineer, or very likely the doctor. If I have another option, I would actually opt to be a policeman. These are the major four that we have all been talking about ever since primary school, when our teachers used to ask. All right? But as years passed, as years went on, I realized how majestic and also how special the teaching world is, and how teaching enables one to be an inspiration to many. Now, of course, we are talking about learners' involvement as well. All right? Now, when a learner is involved, obviously a learner reflects how teaching is conducted in a classroom, an idealistic classroom. That's what we are going to be talking about. That's what I'm going to be talking to you about in a short while. All right? Now, most of the time, the major problem that we face is most of the students who are attending classes, we have three categories of them. Category one, the front benchers who are always 100% focused on what the teacher has to say. All right? Or in other words, you can say the bookworms. All right? And then you have the middle benchers who are on and off. Or in other words, I would say partially involved or partially concentrated. And then we have the back benchers who has no idea what's happening in the class, but they are the ones to score the results. Most of the time. I mean, you can label me as one of these backbenchers actually. All right? I wasn't really a student whom you think that I was. All right? But somewhat, I blended together with the teaching that was conducted in the classroom. Now, how a good or a happening classroom is conducted in terms of learning and also teaching. Now, the first thing you have to understand is teaching is also learning. And I'm very sure there are many teachers who are seated over here, and there are many students who are seated over here would agree. All right? Teaching is indeed learning. So, let me talk to you about the ideal teacher that is expected. How or what do you think an ideal teacher should be, or how should they behave, first of all? All right? Now, in order to be the idealistic teacher or the inspirational teacher, you should be vulgar. The first thing, I understand the first reaction that comes from your mind, vulgar? Are you trying to tell me that we have to use 4-letter words? Are you trying to tell me that we have to use certain terminologies in the classroom that reflects bad words? That is not the idealistic teacher is all about. Now, I'm going to bring you into the concept of the 6-pointer teacher. All right? V-U-L-G-A-R. That's what we are going to talk about. All right? What is it about being vulgar? How are you going to engage your students, or how are you going to engage the learners into becoming a student who is going to be achieving tons and tons and tons? All right? First and foremost, like I said, a teacher is a reflection of how a student would be. All right? If I am going to enter a classroom, and if I want my students to listen to me, or if I want to make sure that at the end of the day, when the student walks into the classroom with, what do you call as being empty, and when they return home, they are going back with something, the first point that you have to look into consideration is a teacher should be versatile. Point number one. Now, when I say being versatile here, we are basically referring to the teaching methods that are being conducted in classrooms, or in other words, how the students are being approached in a classroom. Now, if I'm going to be standing here, and if I'm going to be using a whiteboard throughout the next 2 hours of your lesson, obviously at the end of the day, you are going to start yawning. This happens in most classrooms. Or in other words, if let's say I don't use any teaching aids for you, it will cause you boredom as well. All right, all this will lead to a classroom that is going to be dull. At the end of the day, nothing is going to be absorbed during the teaching and learning process. All right, so a teacher has to be versatile in delivering the messages to the students. Now, versatile in what sense? If let's say you are using teaching aids, right? Have this concept of being in terms of varieties. Okay, like for example, if today one of your lessons is going to be using whiteboard, go ahead. If the next day the student needs to understand further, why don't you use a video to enhance their understanding? If you think that a student needs a role play session in the class, go ahead. Make them your best actors and actresses, even better than Tom Cruise and also Katie Holmes. We are all good actors, by the way. You want to know the truth? Ask your students. All right? Now, that's the first point about being versatile, right, when you're conducting lessons. Point number 2 that I would like to address to you is being unpredictable. What do you mean by being unpredictable? What kind of teacher is someone who becomes unpredictable? Now, what I mean by unpredictable here is give surprises to the students. Ask yourselves, don't you like surprises? We all love surprises. It happens during Valentine's Day. It happens during birthdays. It happens during any special occasions, even when you're proposing to someone. Surprises and surprises and surprises. You want to enhance a good teaching, or you want to enhance a good learning environment, giving surprises and being unpredictable is what is expected in the classroom. Okay? Now, when I'm talking about being unpredictable, we are also talking about how a teacher can actually mold himself or herself into a good celebrity in the classroom as well. All right? Now, do not reveal to the students what you're going to teach. That's the most important thing. If the student already know what they are going to be learning for that day, I mean, it's good to give like a teaser. I mean, let's take a movie, for example. We are all watching a teaser, followed by a trailer, and then we are gauging ourselves to the cinema halls to watch the actual movie. A classroom setting should be done in such a way, whereby you give a hint to the student of what they are going to be learning for that day, but do not reveal what is going to be taught for the day. Be unpredictable, right? Give the surprise element. Keep your lessons mysterious so that students will develop a hunger among themselves. Every day they will be craving what's going to happen today, what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen next week, what's going to happen next month. It will be an ongoing process. When curiosity is created, a student is generally developing critical thinking skills. When you are curious, you tend to explore. When you tend to explore, you are self-developing yourself. That's what happens in a good classroom. That's what an idealistic teacher is expected of. Right? Now, I've had this good experience before where I walked into a classroom. All right? This was back in China. When I was teaching in China, obviously, I had no idea what they're talking because I don't really speak Chinese. All right, and people in China, they are so good in terms of their native language, but the way how they treat you is so friendly. All right. Now, of course, when I walked in, their mindset of a teacher was, a teacher should be someone who speaks in bombastic language. You understand what is, by the term of bombastic? Their expectation was someone with a high profile, a high class language, and they were all ready to be silent in the class. They were ready. I mean, before I entered the class, I was trying to study this group of students, and I understood that they were all, they were telling each other, it's English. I think we should remain silent and let him talk. Let's see what we can learn from there. All right? But of course, but what I did, at that very moment, right, I just walked up to one of their canteen operators and I just asked them one simple sentence. Can you please teach me how to say, have you eaten in Chinese? All right? Very importantly, you have to gauge yourselves with the students so that they feel comfortable and the learning becomes easy. So what I did, when I walked into the classroom, the first I walked in and then the general greeting was there, good morning teacher. All right, but I still kept quiet. I kept quiet, I said good morning, and of course they were expecting me to begin the lesson straight away, but the first sentence I told them was, Cher Lama. And they were so surprised as if like they saw something that they have never seen in their world. Right? And they were like, wow, teacher, you speak Chinese. Kenga. That's the first sentence that came from them. All right? And then the learning took place. Everything was mysterious from then on. Right? It actually engaged the students. It made them feel so comfortable. But of course, I'm not saying in an English classroom, you're not supposed to be teaching in Chinese all the time. All right? 1 or 2 hints should do. 1 or 2. All right? But not all the time. Because if it's an English lesson, it should be in English. All right? Now, which brings me to the next point. Number 3, we have seen V, we have seen U, L. Learner-centered approach in a good classroom. What do you mean by a learner-centered approach? One thing that you cannot separate in terms of a classroom, a good classroom, is our students are very, very good in terms of talking. I don't know how good is the teacher, but you can never beat a student when it comes to talking. They can talk many things. They can even tell you how they can travel from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore within 10 minutes. That's how good students are. Unimaginative. Like, you just can't predict what they're thinking. Alright? So when it happens to be in that way, if it's going to be a teacher-centered approach, it is always going to be a one-way communication. I speak, you listen. Rather than doing that, we encourage in a good classroom setting that encourage the students to speak more and the teacher facilitates what's happening in the classroom. Alright? You see your student talking, encourage the student to talk. One very negative habit that most of the facilitators or the teachers have, I'm not blaming everyone, but when an average teaching or a poor teaching happens is that when a student talks, we have this habit of saying, silent. Don't speak. I'm talking. Alright? Of course, in terms of a TED Talk, it's different. But when it comes to a classroom setting, encourage them to talk. I had this one particular teacher a long time ago. I'm sure many of the students here would have done their science assessment, your science experiments back in school. Right? And you always had this one particular workbook where you are supposed to conduct the experiment. After conducting the experiment, you are supposed to change the sentences from active to passive sentences. Have you come across that before? Back in school, I did the same thing. I did the same thing, but sadly, when my teacher said, okay, class, open up page 48. We are going to do this experiment. After you are finished with the experiment, can you please write the can you write the report by changing the active sentences into passive sentences? All right? Of course, myself being a curious person, I asked my teacher, why must change active to passive? Leave active as active lah. Why must I change? All right? And the next response I got was, Vinu, don't ask questions. Just listen to what I have to say, follow what I'm saying. All right? Same thing happened in terms of learning A, E, I, O, U. That's how we Malaysians were taught. How to use a and the. Right? I'm sure many of you in this hall, you were taught to approach the word university, right? The word university, where you have to use N in front. Where you have to use a in front. Right? But the teachers, or most of the teachers who taught us, kept telling us, you have to say A, E, I, O, U in order to use N. But the question is, A, E, I, O, U, right? When you have to use A, E, I, O, U, how am I going to use A and N? So there is no clear-cut explanation that is given where it's supposed to be A, E, O, U. When you question, the teacher says, don't ask. A teacher should encourage students to speak more. All right? Moving on to the next part. Glorify. When a student says something, or when a student achieves something, encourage your students, praise your students. Although it might be a small achievement, encourage them. All right? Tell them, hey, that's a good job. Do not degrade, do not demotivate your students. All right? When you demotivate, the learning process stops, it reduces. All right? Even if he scores from 10 marks to 20 over 100, tell the student, that's a very good improvement. Eventually, the student will feel motivated to learn further. All right? My next point would be being adventurous. Being a teacher doesn't just mean you teach. Sometimes you have to act. Sometimes you have to roll around. Sometimes you have to do all sorts of things. And you have to blend as a student as well. Right? You just cannot stay and say, I'm 30 years old. I'm going to be a 30 years old. If your students are 10, you have to come down to the age of 10. Only then the teaching will happen. All right? If you are going to be rigid, teaching and learning process is just going to be stagnant all the way, and there would not be any improvements involved. All right? Now, moving further, the last point to complete the vulgar, being radiant. What do you mean by being radiant? Classroom teaching should be made fun. If you're going to go to the school, or if you're going to walk up to the classroom at as early as 8 a.m. and you're going to be like this, class, open up your books, page 67, do your work, after 1 hour submit. Okay? You could not be in that way. All right? So, ladies and gentlemen, if you are in the field of teaching, be vulgar all the time. Thank you so much.